On December 5, 1982, shortly after daybreak, a tugboat crew navigating the Escatawpa River near Moss Point, Mississippi, spotted the body of a female toddler floating in the water close to a delta area. The child, estimated at 18 to 24 months old, wore a pink and white striped dress with a white sweater. She had strawberry blonde hair. Jackson County authorities recovered the body. The case received the designation Baby Jane Doe and later Delta Dawn. Autopsy findings established the cause of death as smothering with contributing drowning. The child was alive when placed in the river. She had been in the water between 36 and 48 hours. No identification documents or immediate matching missing child reports existed. The body was transported for examination. Investigators documented clothing, physical characteristics, and dental details. Facial reconstruction was produced. The case file entered standard homicide protocols for unidentified remains. A woman's body was reportedly sighted in the same river vicinity by witnesses, but no adult remains were recovered. The unidentified toddler was buried in Jackson County Memorial Park. The investigation included circulation of descriptions through national missing children channels and local appeals. No matches resulted. The case remained open but inactive for decades with periodic reviews. Alicia and Heinrich was born May 24, 1981, in Missouri to Gwendolyn May Clemens. Clemens, aged 23 at the time of the events, had recently divorced. Last confirmed sightings placed Alicia and her mother in Joplin, Missouri, around Thanksgiving 1982. They left the area with an unidentified male companion, according to family accounts. No further verified contact occurred after late November 1982. In March 2020, Jackson County Sheriff's Office partnered with Othram Laboratory and forensic genealogists, including Anthony and Lee Redgrave. DNA was extracted from retained samples. Sequencing produced a profile suitable for genetic genealogy. Analysis through GDmatch and family tree DNA databases generated candidate family trees. Leads pointed to relatives in Missouri. Reference samples from family members confirmed the match. On December 4, 2020, Jackson County Sheriff Mike Ezell announced the identification of the toddler as Alicia and Heinrich. The process took 52 days from receipt of the DNA profile. Gwendolyn May Clemens was identified as the mother through the same genealogical process. Clemens remains missing since 1982 and is classified as an endangered missing person. The male companion from the Joplin departure has been named a person of interest or suspect in investigative updates. The identification relied on autosomal DNA, genealogical reconstruction, and confirmatory testing. No prior fingerprints, dental records, or direct family reports had linked the child due to the transient circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Othram's forensic sequencing overcame sample degradation. Public appeals and intern involvement, including University of South Alabama student Olivia McCarter, contributed to renewed attention on the file. Post-identification, the grave marker in Jackson County Memorial Park was updated with Alicia's name. Family members in Missouri received notification. The homicide investigation continues with focus on events between late November and early December 1982, the travel route from Missouri to Mississippi, and the identity and actions of the adult male last seen with Alicia and Gwendolyn. No charges have been filed as of the latest public records. Gwendolyn Clemens has never been located despite searches. The sequence begins with Alicia's birth on May 24, 1981. It proceeds through her mother's divorce, the Thanksgiving 1982 departure from Joplin with the companion, the estimated death window of December 3 or 4, 1982, body recovery on December 5, 1982, decades of unidentified status, and resolution via DNA on December 4, 2020. Physical evidence consisted of the body, clothing, and any trace materials preserved from the river recovery. No additional forensic links such as foreign DNA were publicly detailed beyond the identification process. Investigation procedures in 1982 included standard autopsy, clothing analysis, local and national missing persons checks, and witness canvassing along the river and Interstate 10 corridor. The bridge proximity suggested disposal from a vehicle. The smothering preceded entry into the water. Advanced decomposition limited some evidence recovery. Modern re-examination used retained biological material for extraction. The case demonstrated the transition from manual record checks to forensic genetic genealogy for unidentified homicide victims. All documented facts derived from Jackson County Sheriff's Office announcements, Othram laboratory reports, autopsy summaries, genealogist statements, family interviews released through official channels, and contemporaneous news coverage based on law enforcement briefings. No trial or conviction has occurred. The perpetrator in Alicia's smothering and disposal remains unidentified in public records. Gwendolyn May Clemens' disappearance file stays active. Alicia and Heinrich's identification closed 38 years of unknown status but left the homicide and maternal disappearance unresolved. The file remains open for any future developments regarding the companion or additional evidence. On November 29, 1970, a man and his 2 daughters were hiking in Isdalen Valley, also called Ice Valley, near Bergen, Norway. They detected a burnt smell and discovered a charred female body lying among rocks on a scree slope. The body was in a pugilistic position with arms bent forward. Police from Bergen responded and opened case 13470. The remains showed extensive fire damage. The woman had been alive during the burning, as soot was present in her lungs. Traces of petrol were found on the body. Items scattered nearby included a partially burnt plastic bottle, an umbrella, a watch, a ring, earrings, remnants of rubber boots, a shawl, a woolen jumper, and a small empty bottle of Kloster liqueur. Autopsy at Gates Institute determined the cause of death as a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire and overdose of phenobarbital sleeping pills, brand Phenomil. Between 50 and 70 tablets were in her stomach, some undigested, indicating ingestion over hours. Bruises appeared on her neck, consistent with a possible fall or blow. The official verdict issued in early 1971 classified the death as probable suicide. Police closed the active investigation in February 1971, 3 days after discovery. On December 2, 1970, investigators located 2 suitcases at Bergen railway station left on November 23. Fingerprints on a pair of sunglasses inside matched the body. The suitcases contained multiple wigs in different colors and styles, clothing with all manufacturer labels removed, non-prescription glasses, sunglasses, cosmetics, a prescription tube of eczema cream with identifying marks scraped off, silver spoons, maps, train timetables, 135 Norwegian kroner, 5 100 Deutsche Mark notes, Belgian, British, and Swiss coins, and a notepad with coded entries. The codes recorded travel dates, places, and possibly contacts using a simple substitution system. All labels on items had been deliberately cut or scraped away before the death. Hotel records and witness statements placed the woman in Bergen in the weeks before death. She checked into Hotel Hordeheimen on or around 18 to 23 November 1970 under one of her aliases, occupying room 407 before switching rooms. Staff described her as approximately 1.64 to 1.70 meters tall, age 25 to 30 on registration forms, with dark hair, attractive appearance, good teeth with a noticeable gap between the front incisors when smiling, and a habit of changing appearance. She spoke English, German, and French with accents, paid in cash, and behaved cautiously. She was last confirmed alive on 23 November 1970. Police traced her movements across Norway and Europe using the coded notepad and hotel registrations. She used at least 8 false identities with consistent patterns. Genevieve Lancier from Leuven, Claudia Tielt from Brussels with varying addresses, Claudia Nielsen from Ghent, Alexia Zarnmerches from Ljubljana, Vera Jarl from Antwerp. She registered at multiple hotels in Oslo, Trondheim, Stavanger, and Bergen between March and November 1970, frequently changing hotels and rooms, often requesting views or specific floors. She traveled by train, hydrofoil, and plane, carrying minimal but expensive clothing. Witnesses in shops recalled her purchasing rubber boots matching those at the scene. Dental examination revealed distinctive work, 14 fillings and several gold crowns, unusual for Norway at the time and more common in Central or Eastern Europe. Her teeth were removed and jawbone retained as evidence. In 2017, stable isotope analysis on the teeth and jawbone indicated she was born around 1930 plus or minus 4 years, likely in or near Nuremberg, Germany, and spent part of her early childhood in France or near the French-German border. Mitochondrial DNA suggested matrilineal origins in Southeast Europe or Southwest Asia. These findings revised her estimated age at death to closer to 40 to 45 years, older than hotel registrations stated. The investigation interviewed over 100 witnesses. A taxi driver reported transporting her and luggage. A shoe store employee remembered the boot sale. No one provided a clear motive or final hours account. No fingerprints beyond those on the sunglasses yielded matches. No passport or true identification documents surfaced despite extensive checks with Interpol and European police forces. The presence of multiple wigs, cash in several currencies, coded notes, and removed labels led to immediate speculation of intelligence work. Norway maintained strict neutrality but hosted NATO activity. Theories included her operating as a spy for West Germany, Israel tracking Nazi war criminals, or Eastern Bloc services. No agency ever confirmed involvement. In December 1970, police publicly stated suicide as the conclusion and rejected espionage links. The case file was archived. The jawbone and tissue samples remained in storage. In later decades, journalists and researchers reopened the file. The 2017 BBC NRK podcast Death in Ice Valley generated new tips and public analysis of the coded notebook and travel patterns. Isotope results narrowed geographic origins but produced no database match. As of 2025, no positive identification exists. DNA profiles have not matched any known missing persons. The case remains officially unsolved with the death classified as probable suicide despite persistent questions over the fire, bruises, and elaborate efforts to obscure identity. The woman arrived in Norway multiple times in 1970. In March, she stayed in Oslo. In April and May, further movements. In November, she traveled from Stavanger to Bergen. She left luggage at the station on the 23rd and proceeded to Isdalen sometime between the 23rd and 29th. The remote location required a deliberate hike. Petrol on the body indicated the fire was intentionally set. Sleeping pills were ingested in stages. The combination produced incapacitation followed by carbon monoxide inhalation while the fire burned. No suicide note was found. No clear personal items suggested depression or final intent beyond the preparations for anonymity. Post-1971 developments included periodic reviews. In 2017, forensic updates. In 2023, a Swiss newspaper report linked possible connections to banker François Genoud, known for funding controversial causes, and alleged Norwegian intelligence interference in the original probe. These claims remain unverified by official Norwegian authorities. No charges or named suspects have ever been issued. The body was buried after autopsy. The jawbone continues to serve as the primary retained biological evidence. All other remains were interred. No family or associate ever claimed the body despite international appeals. The Isdal woman carried no single consistent name, nationality, or occupation. Hotel staff noted her expensive but practical wardrobe, frequent changes of appearance, and limited social interaction. She ate alone, paid cash, and avoided unnecessary conversation. One witness described a possible companion in Stavanger, but the detail was unconfirmed. Her coded notebook listed dates and locations consistent with her verified hotel stays, sometimes using symbols interpreted as train times or meeting points. The exact code system was never fully decrypted beyond basic reconstruction of itinerary. Investigation procedures in 1970 relied on manual cross-checks of hotel ledgers, shop receipts, taxi logs, and border records. Fingerprint and dental circulation produced no hits. Modern re-examination confirmed the deliberate removal of identifiers occurred prior to the final trip. The eczema cream prescription traced to a non-Norwegian source. Coins and currency indicated recent travel through Belgium, Germany, and Switzerland. The pattern matches that of an individual maintaining operational security, whether for criminal, intelligence, or personal evasion reasons. No financial crimes or direct links to known espionage cases from 1970 were established. The death occurred in a valley locally nicknamed Death Valley due to its steep, isolated terrain and history of accidents. The body was not fully concealed but positioned among boulders where smoke would dissipate. The fire burned intensely enough to destroy facial features and fingerprints on the body itself. The combination of barbiturates and fire ensured rapid incapacitation and death. Official records list the verdict as suicide by self-immolation after drug ingestion. Independent forensic reviews have noted the logistical difficulty of arranging such a death alone in a remote area while heavily sedated. No third-party DNA or foreign fingerprints were reported on scene items. Over 5 decades, the case generated books, documentaries, podcasts, and online analysis. Public appeals in Germany, Belgium, France, and Eastern Europe produced tips but no confirmation. Dental records circulated among European dentists yielded no exact match. The gold crowns and specific filling patterns pointed to dental care received outside Scandinavia, likely in the 1950s or 1960s. Isotope data aligned with wartime or immediate post-war movement from Germany to France. This profile fits thousands of individuals from that era but none whose disappearance matches the 1970 timeline precisely. The woman remains unidentified. The file stays open for any future technological or witness development. No statute of limitations applies to potential homicide inquiries. All documented actions, dates, physical evidence, witness descriptions, and forensic conclusions derive from Bergen police reports, autopsy records, Kripo's files, and subsequent scientific analyses released or summarized in official channels. The sequence begins with the November 29, 1970 discovery and covers the rapid suitcase find, hotel tracing, coded notebook decoding, isotope and DNA testing in 2017, and absence of resolution through 2025. The woman traveled under false names, removed all personal identifiers from possessions, consumed large quantities of sleeping pills, and died in a petrol fire in an isolated Norwegian valley. Her true name, nationality, purpose in Norway, and exact circumstances of death have not been established in verified records. On July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl followed a barking dog into the Race Point Dunes, about 1 mile east of the Race Point Ranger Station in Provincetown, Massachusetts, inside Cape Cod National Seashore. The girl found the decomposing body of a woman lying face down on half of a beach blanket. 2 sets of footprints led to the location. Tire tracks appeared 50 yards away. Insect activity and decomposition indicated the woman had been dead for approximately 2 weeks. The body was nude. A blue bandana and a pair of Wrangler jeans were folded under the head. Long auburn or reddish hair remained pulled back in a ponytail secured by a gold-flecked elastic band. Toenails were painted pink. Both hands and 1 forearm had been removed. The head was nearly severed from the body. The left side of the skull was crushed. Autopsy established the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. Signs of post-mortem sexual assault were present. The hands were severed after death, likely to prevent fingerprint identification. Investigators recovered no other physical evidence at the scene beyond the blanket, jeans, bandana, and elastic. The sand showed no signs of a struggle. The victim stood approximately 5 feet 6.5 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed around 145 pounds with an athletic build. She had expensive dental work, including crowns valued between $5,000 and $10,000. Several teeth had been removed. Initial age estimates ranged from 25 to 40 years, later refined through records. Police photographed the body, collected evidence, and transported the remains. The case received the internal designation as the oldest unidentified homicide victim in Massachusetts history at the time. The body was buried in October 1974 in St. Peter's Cemetery, Provincetown, after initial investigations produced no identification. Exhumations occurred in 1980, 2000, and 2013 for further forensic examination, DNA sampling, and imaging. Facial reconstructions were created in 1979, 2010, and other years using clay models and CT scans. The case file accumulated thousands of missing persons checks, vehicle logs from the area, and interviews. Early leads included possible links to organized crime figures and other missing women, all ruled out through DNA or records. One theory connected the victim to an extra in the 1975 film Jaws due to similar clothing observed in crowd scenes, but this remained unconfirmed speculation in 2022. Skeletal remains were sent to Othram Laboratory in Texas. Scientists extracted and sequenced DNA from degraded, chemically treated bone samples. Forensic genetic genealogy produced a profile that identified distant relatives. Confirmatory testing established the victim as Ruth Marie Terry, born September 8, 1936, in Whitwell, Tennessee. She was 37 years old at the time of death. The FBI Boston Field Office, Massachusetts State Police, Provincetown Police Department, and Cape and Islands District Attorney announced the identification on October 31, 2022. Ruth Marie Terry was born to Johnny and Eva Terry. Her mother died at age 23. In 1957, after a short marriage, Terry moved to Livonia, Michigan, and worked at the Fisher Body Automotive plant. In 1958, she gave birth to a son, Richard. Due to financial constraints, she allowed the plant superintendent, Richard Hanchett Sr., to adopt the boy in exchange for settling her debts. After the adoption, Terry moved to California. She contacted her son in 1972, but he was recovering from a drug overdose and declined immediate contact. On February 16, 1974, Terry married Guy Rockwell Moldavin, an antiques dealer in Reno, Nevada. For months before her death, the couple visited her family in Whitwell, Tennessee. Relatives later stated Terry appeared subdued and unlike herself in Moldavin's presence. He displayed possessive behavior. The couple then visited her half-brother Kenneth and his wife Carol in Chattanooga. They mentioned plans to travel across the United States purchasing antiques and specifically referenced visiting Massachusetts. After Terry's death, Moldavin returned to Tennessee and informed her family that she had disappeared from their California home. He provided limited details and stayed briefly. Terry's brother James traveled to California, hired a private investigator, and received information that her belongings had been sold and that she had left voluntarily to join a religious cult. Family members later listed her as deceased in obituaries. Some speculated witness protection involvement. Guy Rockwell Moldavin was born October 27, 1923. He had multiple marriages and used aliases. In 1960, his second wife Manzanita Ryan and her daughter Dolores and Mearns disappeared in Seattle. Moldavin became the prime suspect. Human remains were later found in his septic tank but could not be conclusively linked. He faced larceny charges for swindling money from another wife's family and received a suspended sentence after repayment. He was never charged in the Seattle disappearances. True crime writer and Rule documented his history in connection with those cases. On August 28, 2023, Cape and Islands District Attorney Robert J. Galabois announced that the investigation into Ruth Marie Terry's death had been closed. Authorities determined that Guy Moldavin was responsible for her murder. Moldavin died on March 14, 2002, in Salinas, California, at age 78. No charges could be filed due to his prior death. The murder occurred in or around early to mid-July 1974. Terry's body was transported or placed in the dunes. The removal of hands and forearm, near decapitation, and cranial trauma align with efforts to conceal identity. Moldavin's pattern of marriages, disappearances of prior partners, and presence with Terry in the period immediately preceding the discovery form the basis of the determination. No trial occurred. No additional physical evidence directly linking Moldavin to the Provincetown scene has been publicly detailed beyond the investigative conclusion. The case remained unsolved for identification purposes for 48 years. Standard 1974 procedures included manual missing persons cross-checks, dental charting circulation, and local canvassing. Later advances in DNA extraction from compromised skeletal remains and genetic genealogy resolved the identity. The hands were never recovered. The full sequence of travel between California, Tennessee, and Cape Cod was reconstructed through family statements and marriage records. Terry's son Richard Hanchett learned of his biological mother's identity and murdered decades after her death. Family members described her as vivacious in earlier years before the marriage to Moldavin. Post-identification, the remains were associated with updated records. A new headstone was placed. The Provincetown burial site received attention from investigators and family. The case file, once focused on Jane Doe identification, shifted to confirmation of the perpetrator already deceased. No other victims have been definitively linked in public records to the same location or method, though Moldovan's earlier suspected cases in Seattle and California involved missing women and a murdered man. All details derive from official announcements by the FBI, Massachusetts State Police, Cape and Islands District Attorney's Office, Provincetown Police, autopsy records, Othram laboratory reports, family interviews released through law enforcement channels, and contemporaneous police documentation. The timeline runs from Ruth Marie Terry's 1936 birth in Tennessee, through her 1958 adoption decision, 1974 marriage and family visits, July 1974 murder, July 26 discovery, multiple exhumations, 2022 genetic identification, and 2023 case closure with attribution to Moldovan. No speculation on unverified motives or additional unreported crimes is included. The physical destruction of identifying features delayed resolution by nearly 5 decades until forensic genealogy matched her to surviving relatives. On May 30, 2005, 29-year-old Melody Wiggins was reported missing in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Her partially stripped body was found 2 days later on June 2 in rural Edgecombe County. Autopsy determined she died from multiple knife wounds combined with blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators noted the pattern of vulnerable victims. All documented cases involved African American women from the Rocky Mount area, many with histories of drug addiction and prostitution. Between 2005 and 2009, at least 10 women were linked to the series in Edgecombe and Halifax counties. 8 bodies were recovered. The cases became known as the Edgecombe County Serial Killings or the Seven Bridges Killer due to multiple discoveries near Seven Bridges Road, a rural stretch outside Rocky Mount. In 2003, 21-year-old Denise Williams, a mother of 2, was found dead in a swamp southeast of town. Her case was later grouped with the series. On January 16, 2007, relatives reported 43-year-old Christine Mary Boone missing. Her skeletonized remains were located on March 9, 2010, in a wooded area in Halifax County near Scotland Neck. Cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition. On May 8, 2007, 35-year-old Jackie Nick-Elia Thorpe was reported missing. Her severely decomposed body was discovered on August 17, 2007, near Seven Bridges Road. She was the first victim whose remains were found at that location. Joyce Renee Durham, 46, was last seen on June 17, 2007, and remains missing in February 2008. 50-year-old Ernestine Battle went missing. A farmer found her skeletonized remains on March 14, 2008, near Seven Bridges Road. Decomposition prevented determination of exact cause of death. Battle had a history of trading food for drugs and had stopped regular contact with family despite prior patterns of staying in touch. On February 5, 2009, 36-year-old Yolanda Renee Lancaster, known as Snap, was reported missing. Hunters found her remains in January 2011 in a wooded area off Seven Bridges Road. On February 22, 2009, 28-year-old Taraha Shinice Nicholson was reported missing. Her body was located on March 7, 2009, near Seven Bridges Road. An autopsy confirmed she had been strangled. Sperm was recovered from her body. Elizabeth Jane Smallwood, 33, was found on a soccer field in Rocky Mount. Decomposition indicated she had been dead approximately 6 months. She had a criminal record for drugs and prostitution and was the sister of another convicted murderer. On April 25, 2009, 31-year-old Jarnice Latanya Hargrove was reported missing. Her remains were found on June 29, 2009, in a wooded area a few yards from Seven Bridges Road. On March 27, 2010. A man on an ATV discovered the body of 40-year-old Roberta Williams beside Seven Bridges Road. Family members stated they had previously reported her missing, a claim disputed by law enforcement at the time. DNA from the sperm on Taraha Nicholson matched Antoine Maurice Pittman. Pittman was born July 15, 1978, in Rocky Mount and raised by a single mother. His criminal record began in 1994 with a charge involving a 2-year-old child, resulting in a plea to indecent liberties and probation. He had subsequent arrests for theft, assault, resisting arrest, DUI, and failing to register as a sex offender. In 2007, he was arrested for assaulting a prostitute in the relevant area. Pittman lived in locations near several body dump sites, including near his grandparents' home in Whitakers close to Seven Bridges Road and a house near the soccer field where Smallwood was found. In 2006, he stayed in a trailer in Scotland Neck near where Boone's remains were later discovered. On the day Jarnice Hargrove disappeared, police found Pittman unconscious in his car on Seven Bridges Road with his pants lowered. He was charged with DUI and released. Pittman was already in Nash County Jail in August 2009 on charges including driving with a revoked license and sex offender registration violations when DNA linked him to Nicholson. He was charged with her murder in September 2009. At trial in 2011, Pittman admitted picking up Nicholson on March 1, 2009, paying for sex, and dropping her off near a library but denied killing her. A jury convicted him of first-degree murder after less than an hour of deliberation. He received a life sentence without parole. Authorities suspected Pittman in additional deaths based on proximity, timeline, criminal history, and the cessation of linked killings after his incarceration. He was never charged with the other murders due to insufficient evidence for prosecution. No other perpetrator has been identified or charged for the remaining cases. Some investigators and family members have questioned whether all deaths were committed by a single individual or if additional offenders contributed. The victims shared socioeconomic vulnerabilities in a region affected by poverty, crack cocaine, and limited opportunities following industrial decline. Many engaged in survival sex work along known routes. Bodies were typically dumped in rural wooded areas, fields, or roadsides with signs of violence including stabbing, strangulation, and blunt trauma. Advanced decomposition in several cases limited forensic recovery beyond basic identification through DNA from relatives or dental records. Investigation faced criticism for delayed public warnings to the community despite multiple similar deaths of Black women. Initial responses treated cases individually until patterns in body locations and victim profiles prompted serial killer recognition. DNA from Nicholson provided the primary physical link to a suspect. No additional DNA matches or fingerprints publicly tied Pittman or others to remaining scenes. As of the latest records, Joyce Renee Durham remains missing. The other recovered victims were identified through family DNA, clothing, or personal effects. Pittman continues serving life for Nicholson's murder. No further arrests have occurred. The Edgecombe County Sheriff's Office and North Carolina authorities maintain open files on the uncharged cases. Public appeals for information continue regarding activities along Seven Bridges Road and connections among victims in the mid-2000s. The sequence covers disappearances and discoveries from 2003 through 2010, with peak activity between 2005 and 2009. All verified details derive from official police reports, autopsy findings, court records from Pittman's trial, family statements released through law enforcement, and contemporaneous news documentation. No additional victims have been conclusively added beyond the 10 to 11 linked in public investigations. The rural dump sites, victim demographics, and offender access to the area form the documented investigative framework. The cases highlight procedural handling of vulnerable populations in serial investigations prior to stronger DNA and pattern recognition protocols. On February 25, 1957, a 26-year-old college student named Frederick Benonize was chasing a rabbit in a wooded area off Susquehanna Road in the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia. He discovered the naked body of a young boy wrapped in a blanket and placed inside a cardboard box that had originally contained a baby bassinet. Benonize did not report the find immediately and contacted police the following day. Philadelphia police responded to the scene. The boy measured approximately 3 feet 3 inches tall and weighed around 30 pounds. His body showed signs of severe malnutrition and was covered in bruises and scars. He had a fresh haircut with visible clipper marks. The cause of death was determined by autopsy as blunt force trauma to the head, with multiple contusions, abrasions, a subdural hemorrhage, and other injuries consistent with a severe beating. The boy had been dead for several days to 2 weeks. His hands were small with wrinkled skin from possible prior immersion in water. No sexual assault was documented. The cardboard box traced to a J.C. Penney store in Upper Darby. The blanket was a cheap, multicolored cotton flannel type. A navy blue corduroy cap, a tan scarf, and other items were recovered nearby. Police fingerprinted the body and circulated the prints, dental charts, and physical description through national channels. No missing child report matched. The case received extensive media coverage, but no identification resulted. The boy was buried in a potter's field at Ivy Hill Cemetery under the designation America's Unknown Child. Investigators pursued thousands of leads over decades. Hospitals, orphanages, and foster homes in the Philadelphia area and beyond were checked. The child's fingerprints and footprints produced no matches. A prominent early theory involved a foster home run by Arthur and Catherine Nicoletti located about 1.5 miles from the discovery site. A former medical examiner's office employee, Remington Bristow, pursued this angle after a psychic consultation. He attended an estate sale at the property and noted a similar bassinet and matching blankets. Police interviewed family members connected to the home multiple times. All foster children were accounted for, and the family was cleared of involvement. Other leads included checks on traveling carnivals, transient families, and possible abduction scenarios. The boy's malnourished state and extensive scarring suggested long-term neglect or abuse prior to the fatal beating. The deliberate disposal in a publicly accessible wooded area indicated the perpetrator or perpetrators wanted the body found but did not want the child identified. No parents or guardians ever reported him missing. In 1998, the body was exhumed for the first time to obtain DNA samples. In 2019, a second exhumation occurred because earlier samples were insufficient for advanced testing. The Vidic Society, a group of forensic experts, assisted the Philadelphia Police Department over many years. In the early 2020s, detectives collaborated with genetic genealogists. They used forensic genetic genealogy on the boy's DNA profile, building family trees through public databases and confirming connections through additional reference samples. On November 30, 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department announced they had identified the victim. On December 8, 2022, they publicly named him Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born on January 13, 1953, making him 4 years old at the time of death in February 1957. His biological parents were identified as Augustus John Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Plunkett, both deceased by the time of the announcement. Joseph had living half-siblings. The identification relied on DNA from the paternal side of the family and genealogical reconstruction. Joseph lived in the West Philadelphia area prior to his death. Limited public details have been released about his exact living situation or custody arrangements in the months and years before February 1957. Police have not disclosed specific circumstances of his final days or the individuals responsible for the fatal injuries. The case remains an active homicide investigation. A $20,000 reward is offered for information leading to arrest and conviction. The discovery site on Susquehanna Road between Very and Pine Roads showed no immediate signs of a struggle. The body was placed in the box and positioned in dense underbrush. The blanket and box suggested the perpetrator had access to household items and sought a method of transport and disposal that minimized immediate detection. Postmortem handling indicated the child was washed or prepared before placement in the box. The haircut appeared recent and amateur. Over 65 years, the Philadelphia Police Department maintained the file as the city's oldest unsolved homicide. Hundreds of tips were investigated. Early police work included door-to-door canvassing in Foxchase and surrounding neighborhoods. The cap found near the body was men's size and did not belong to the child. Extensive efforts to trace the blanket and box serial or batch numbers produced no actionable purchaser information. After the 2022 identification, the headstone at Ivy Hill Cemetery was updated with Joseph's name. In January 2026, on what would have been his 73rd birthday, the Vidic Society announced a broader initiative to identify other unidentified murdered children nationwide using similar genetic genealogy methods. Joseph's case served as a landmark for the application of this technology in long-term unidentified remains investigations. No arrests have been made. No named suspects have been publicly identified in connection with the beating death. Philadelphia police continue to treat the matter as an open investigation and have requested public assistance with any information about Joseph's life between 1953 and early 1957, his family dynamics, or individuals who may have had contact with him in the period leading to his death. Both biological parents were deceased prior to the identification. Details regarding potential custody, adoption, or informal care arrangements remain limited in public statements to protect ongoing investigative avenues. The sequence of events begins with Joseph's birth on January 13, 1953, proceeds through an undocumented period of his short life marked by evidence of chronic malnutrition and prior injuries, culminates in his death by blunt force trauma in February 1957, and includes the discovery on February 25 or 26, 1957, decades of unsuccessful identification efforts, 2 exhumations, and final confirmation via DNA and genetic genealogy in late 2022. The physical evidence consisted of the body itself, the bassinet box, the blanket, the nearby cap, and limited trace materials. No fingerprints, witnesses, or confessions have resolved the identity of the person or persons who inflicted the fatal injuries. The investigation procedures followed standard 1957 homicide protocols updated over time with forensic advancements, including multiple rounds of DNA extraction and analysis. The case file incorporates autopsy records, scene photographs, item tracings, and genealogical database matches. As of 2026, the homicide remains unsolved with active leads under review by the Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit. On July 23, 2018, 2 hikers discovered a body inside a yellow tent at Noble's Camp, a remote campsite in Big Cypress National Preserve near Ochope, Florida, approximately 5 miles north of Interstate 75. The deceased was a white male, 5 feet 8 inches tall, extremely emaciated at 83 pounds. He lay twisted with eyes open. No identification documents, wallet, phone, or credit cards were present. Items recovered included a black Salomon hiking backpack, blue jeans, a Nalgene water bottle, and basic camping gear consistent with long-distance hiking. The Collier County Sheriff's Office responded. An autopsy by Deputy Chief Medical Examiner Manfred D. Borges listed the cause of death as undetermined. Pronounced cachexia and severe wasting were noted, with significant loss of body fat and organ atrophy. No evidence of traumatic injury, infection, cancer, tumors, cardiac damage, or drug toxicity appeared. A faint scar on the abdomen was documented. Teeth were well maintained with some grinding. The manner of death remained undetermined. No foul play was indicated. The body showed signs of prolonged starvation prior to death. The man carried trail names, mostly harmless, Denham, and used the alias Ben Bylamy at hostels. He had hiked sections of the Appalachian Trail starting in April 2017 from Harriman State Park north of New York City and later the Florida Trail. Hikers who encountered him described a quiet, capable individual who shared limited personal details, avoided technology, paid in cash, and maintained distance from deeper conversations. He appeared in his late 30s to early 40s with salt and pepper hair and beard. No fingerprints matched law enforcement databases. No tattoos or distinctive scars beyond the abdominal mark aided identification. The sheriff's office released a facial sketch and photos of his gear. The hiking community circulated images. Tips identified him through trail encounters, but no real name emerged initially. The case generated widespread online interest among hikers, amateur sleuths, and true crime followers. In 2020, the Collier County Sheriff's Office partnered with Othram Laboratory for forensic genetic genealogy. DNA extraction from remains produced a profile indicating likely Cajun ancestry with roots in southern Louisiana. Public appeals, targeted social media posts, and Facebook group outreach in Louisiana areas followed. A former colleague recognized the images and contacted authorities with the name Vance John Rodriguez. Family members provided reference DNA samples. DNA comparison confirmed the match. In January 2021, the Collier County Sheriff's Office publicly identified the hiker as Vance John Rodriguez, born February 1976 near Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was 42 years old at death. Rodriguez had worked as a senior software engineer and IT professional, including at an e-commerce company in Baton Rouge and later remote or freelance work after moving to Brooklyn, New York, around 2013. He used the online handle Vager in coding communities and gaming, notably Screeps. Rodriguez left his Brooklyn apartment in mid-April 2017. He abandoned his passport, wallet, credit cards, computers, and other identifying items. He withdrew cash and departed with minimal hiking equipment. Prior to the hike, he had expressed dissatisfaction with urban life, experienced depressive episodes, mood swings, and alcohol use. Reports from acquaintances and former partners described mental health struggles, isolation, and instances of abusive behavior in relationships. At age 15, he survived a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the abdomen. Leaving the documented scarred, he hiked southbound on the Appalachian Trail, then continued into the Florida Trail. He registered at hostels under Ben Bellamy and interacted with other hikers under his trail names. No clear record exists of his exact route in the final months or precise arrival in Big Cypress. He carried limited supplies and relied on cash. His extreme weight loss indicated inadequate caloric intake over an extended period during the journey. Vance Rodriguez had a twin sister and older brother. He attended the University of Southwestern Louisiana but did not complete his degree. Colleagues described him as technically talented in programming. After relocating to New York, personal relationships deteriorated amid reported depression and isolation. He lived off savings for periods and took sporadic freelance work. No criminal record existed. No military service placed prints in databases. Post-identification, family contact was established through Louisiana authorities. The remains were released for disposition. The case file closed regarding identity but retained undetermined cause and manner of death. No evidence supported homicide. The combination of cachexia and undetermined factors left the precise mechanism unresolved. Rodriguez had no known terminal illness per autopsy. Organ weights were reduced consistent with starvation, but no underlying disease explained the decline. The investigation relied on standard missing persons protocols, trail community outreach, facial reconstruction sketches, and eventual forensic genealogy when traditional methods failed. Othram's work, combined with public tips, resolved the identification after over 2 years. The effort highlighted challenges in tracing individuals who deliberately shed identifiers before extended travel. Rodriguez's decision to leave documents behind and use aliases delayed recognition despite widespread circulation of his image among hikers. Timeline details. Born February 1976 in Louisiana. Moved to New York around 2013. Departed Brooklyn apartment mid-April 2017. Active on trails through 2017 and into 2018. Body discovered July 23, 2018. Identified January 2021 via DNA. No additional victims or linked crimes attached to his movements. No suicide note or explicit final statements recovered. His gear and campsite suggested he stopped intentionally at Noble's camp. Food supplies were minimal or exhausted at time of death. All facts derived from Collier County Sheriff's Office releases, Othram laboratory reports, autopsy summaries, journalist interviews with acquaintances and hikers, and court-adjacent records. The sequence reconstructs Rodriguez's transition from IT professional in New York to unidentified decedent in Florida through deliberate anonymity, long-distance hiking, progressive physical decline, and post-mortem identification. No charges or third-party involvement were indicated. The death remains classified with undetermined cause in official records. On September 12, 1976, at approximately 10:20 a.m., Baltimore County Police responded to a report of a body found along the 5600 block of Dogwood Road near the back gate of Lorraine Park Cemetery in Woodlawn, Baltimore County, Maryland. The body was that of a young female, partially wrapped in a white sheet. Bandanas covered parts of her face. She had been beaten, raped, and strangled. The rape caused significant bleeding that soaked into her clothing. Autopsy confirmed the cause of death as asphyxia due to strangulation. The manner of death was homicide. She had likely been killed elsewhere and transported to the dump site. The victim was estimated initially between 15 and 30 years old. She had shoulder-length brown hair, a crude tattoo with initials on her upper right arm near the shoulder, and a 1.5-inch scar on her left thigh. The tattoo initials were interpreted as possibly JP, JS, JD, JB, SP, SS, SD, or SB. A powerful sedative, chlorpromazine, was present in her system. The body showed signs of sexual assault with associated trauma. No identification documents, purse, or personal items were found at the scene. Investigators recovered the sheet and bandanas as evidence. The case became known as Woodlawn Jane Doe due to the discovery location. Police circulated descriptions, dental charts, fingerprints if obtainable, and physical details through national channels. Facial reconstructions were created and released. The case appeared on America's Most Wanted and received periodic media coverage. Despite thousands of tips over decades, no identification resulted from traditional methods. The investigation included checks of local missing persons reports, psychiatric facilities due to the sedative and sheet origin theories, and potential links to transient or runaway populations. Margaret A. Federolf was born on December 27, 1959, in Alexandria, Virginia. She was 16 years old at the time of her death. Family members reported her missing in the summer of 1975. She had a history as a habitual runaway. Limited details exist on her activities between her disappearance from Alexandria and her murder in September 1976. No verified sightings or records placed her movements in the Baltimore area prior to the body discovery. In 2021, Baltimore County Police partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Bode Technology, and Othram Laboratory for Advanced Forensic Genetic Genealogy. Degraded DNA evidence from the case was processed. A comprehensive genealogical profile was developed and analyzed through relevant databases. Leads directed investigators to family connections in Virginia. Confirmatory reference samples established the positive identification of Woodlawn Jane Doe as Margaret Federolf. Baltimore County officials announced the identification on September 15, 2021, nearly 45 years after the body discovery. The identification shifted the case focus from unknown victim to confirmed homicide of a named individual. Margaret's family received notification. The grave marker and records were updated. Baltimore County Police maintained the active homicide investigation. No arrests have been made. No named suspects have been publicly identified. The presence of chlorpromazine suggested possible access to pharmaceutical or institutional sources, but no direct links were established. The sheet and bandanas produced no traceable purchaser or origin that solved the case. Post-identification developments included continued appeals for information regarding Margaret's activities after she left Alexandria in 1975. Any associates in the Baltimore or Washington, D.C. metropolitan areas, and individuals who may have had contact with her in the days or weeks before September 11, 1976. Investigators noted the body was dumped in a relatively accessible location near a cemetery, indicating the perpetrator or perpetrators transported her by vehicle and sought to dispose of the remains with partial concealment. No additional forensic matches, such as foreign DNA profiles leading to a suspect, have been publicly released. The original 1976 investigation followed standard procedures for the era, including scene processing, autopsy with toxicology, evidence collection, and manual cross-referencing of missing persons. Advances in DNA extraction from compromised samples and genetic genealogy resolved the identification where earlier CODIs and conventional testing had not. The case demonstrated the interval between disappearance in one jurisdiction and body discovery in another, with no immediate cross-reporting that matched. Margaret's runaway history likely contributed to delayed recognition of her absence as high risk. All verified details derive from Baltimore County Police Department records, official announcements, autopsy findings, Othram and Bode Technology reports, and family statements channeled through law enforcement. The timeline begins with Margaret Federolf's birth on December 27, 1959, includes her runaway status and 1975 disappearance from Alexandria, Virginia, proceeds to her death on or about September 11, 1976, body discovery on September 12, 1976, 45 years of unidentified status, and DNA confirmation in September 2021. The homicide remains unsolved with no statute of limitations. The investigation stays open for any future leads on the individual or individuals responsible for her abduction, drugging, sexual assault, strangulation, and disposal. No additional victims have been conclusively linked in public records to the same perpetrator. On April 13, 1977, Charlie and Mavis McLeod went to an abandoned farm they owned near Lynbrook, Alberta, approximately 13 kilometers west of Tofield and 68 kilometers east of Edmonton. They were searching the old septic tank for a pump to reuse. While draining the tank with buckets, they discovered a body wrapped in a yellow bedsheet and tied with nylon rope. The remains were in advanced decomposition after spending several months in the partially water-filled, 1.8-meter deep tank. RCMP officers from Tofield responded and recovered the body using ice cream pails to scoop out the contents. The victim was a male, approximately 5 feet 5 to 5 feet 7 inches tall, medium build, around 150 pounds, with dark brown hair. He was estimated to be between 26 and 40 years old, later refined to about 26. Initial examinations noted he was right-handed, had all his teeth with prior dental work, and showed signs of a serious childhood illness. Decomposition and damage prevented immediate determination of gender or full identification. Fingerprints could not be obtained. He wore a blue Levi work shirt, gray undershirt, blue jeans, gray wool socks, and brown wallaby shoes. The body had been covered with quicklime to accelerate decomposition. Autopsy and forensic examination revealed extreme pre-death torture. The victim had been beaten, bound, and burned repeatedly with a blowtorch and lit cigarettes. Burns appeared on clothing and skin, including the sole of a sock. He was sexually mutilated, most likely with farming shears or similar tools. He was shot at least twice with a .32 caliber semi-automatic or automatic weapon, once in the head and once in the chest. The combination of injuries caused death. Investigators described the crime as one of the most vicious, vindictive, and sadistic they had encountered. The body was dumped headfirst into the septic tank after the torture and shooting. The farm was unoccupied at the time, providing a remote disposal site. Police launched a homicide investigation under the Tofield RCMP. The case received the internal designation and public nickname Septic Tank Sam, also referred to as Sam Doe or Tofield John Doe. Dental charts, clothing descriptions, and physical details were circulated nationally. Facial reconstructions were produced and released in later years, including a 1988 version. Thousands of tips were received and investigated over decades. No identification resulted from fingerprints, dental records, or missing persons crosschecks in the pre-DNA era. The victim was buried in an unmarked grave in Edmonton Cemetery. Gordon Edwin Sanderson, known as Gordy, was born on October 22, 1950, in Manitoba, Canada. He was an Indigenous man. At age 9, he became a victim of the 60s scoop and was removed from his family and placed in foster care. He struggled with addictions and had multiple interactions with police. In the 1970s, he lived in Edmonton, Alberta. He had a daughter and siblings, including a brother named Arthur. Sanderson had planned to visit his brother in Calgary around the time of his disappearance. Family members reported efforts to locate him after he went missing, but no immediate connection was made to the Tofield remains. In October 2017, the Alberta RCMP launched a national DNA program for unidentified human remains. Samples from the case were submitted to Othram Incorporated, a laboratory in Texas specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. DNA extraction and sequencing produced a profile suitable for database analysis. Genealogical reconstruction generated family trees and candidate relatives. Reference samples from Sanderson's family members confirmed the match. RCMP identified the remains as Gordon Edwin Sanderson in January 2021. The public announcement occurred on June 30, 2021, during a virtual press conference. The identification transformed the case from an unidentified homicide to the murder of a named individual. Alberta RCMP Historical Homicide and Missing Persons units took over the active investigation. They appealed for information on Sanderson's movements in late 1976 or early 1977. Associates in Edmonton travel toward Calgary, and anyone who may have seen him with others near Tofield or the abandoned farm. The killers likely knew Sanderson or had some connection, given the personal nature of the prolonged torture. No arrests have been made. Investigators noted the passage of time means the perpetrator or perpetrators may no longer be alive. The murder occurred sometime in late 1976 or early 1977. Sanderson was last known to be in Edmonton before planning the trip to Calgary. The remote farm location suggests the perpetrators selected or knew the site for disposal. The use of quicklime, binding, and deep tank placement indicate intent to conceal the body and hinder identification. The torture elements, binding, burning, mutilation, and shooting, point to a prolonged attack rather than a quick killing. No specific motive has been publicly established. No additional forensic links, such as matching DNA from suspects, have been released. Investigation procedures in 1977 included scene processing at the abandoned property, autopsy with toxicology and ballistics, clothing and item analysis, and manual checks of missing persons. The case file accumulated tips, reconstructions, and periodic reviews. Advances in genetic genealogy resolved the identity after 44 years where traditional methods failed. The remains were associated with updated records following confirmation. Family members, including Sanderson's daughter, received notification. The homicide file remains open with no statute of limitations. All documented facts derive from Alberta RCMP official releases, autopsy summaries, Othram laboratory reports, genealogical confirmation details, family statements through law enforcement channels, and contemporaneous police documentation. The timeline covers Sanderson's birth on October 22, 1950, in Manitoba, removal to foster care at age 9, residence in Edmonton in the 1970s, disappearance en route to Calgary, murder by torture and shooting in 1976 to 1977, body discovery on April 13, 1977, decades of unidentified status, DNA identification in January 2021, and public naming on June 30, 2021. The physical evidence included the body with torture and ballistic wounds, yellow sheet, nylon rope, quicklime, clothing, and .32 caliber projectiles. No named suspects or convictions exist as of the latest records. The investigation continues to seek details on Gordon Sanderson's final days and the individuals responsible for his death. On December 1, 1948, at approximately 6:30 a.m., a man named John Lyons and his wife noticed a well-dressed body slumped against the seawall on Somerton Beach in Somerton Park, a suburb of Adelaide, South Australia. The man sat with his back to the wall, legs extended, in a relaxed position. Lyons initially thought the man was asleep or drunk. Police Constable John Moss responded and confirmed the man was dead. No signs of struggle appeared at the scene. The deceased was a white male, approximately 40 to 45 years old, 5 feet 11 inches tall, with a broad-shouldered athletic build, gray eyes, and mousy brown hair graying at the temples. He wore a white shirt, red and blue tie, brown trousers, socks, polished brown shoes, a gray double-breasted coat, and underwear with the label Keen. All clothing tags except one had been removed. His pockets contained an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a used bus ticket from the city to Glenelg, a half-empty pack of juicy fruit chewing gum, an Army Club cigarette packet containing Kensitas cigarettes, a box of Bryant and May matches, 2 combs, and a partially filled packet of chewing gum. No wallet, identification, or cash was present. Autopsy by government pathologist Dr. John Dwyer on December 2, 1948 recorded the time of death around 2 a.m. The man had eaten a pasty 3 to 4 hours before death. His pupils were smaller than normal. The spleen was 3 times normal size. Blood was present in the stomach. The heart showed signs of failure. No external injuries or marks of violence were found. Toxicology tests for common poisons returned negative results, but Dwyer concluded death was not natural and likely resulted from a barbiturate or soluble hypnotic poison that was undetectable with 1948 technology. The coroner later determined the cause as unknown but consistent with poisoning. Police treated the death as suspicious. The body was embalmed on December 10, 1948, the first such instance in South Australia for an unidentified person. A plaster death mask was created. Fingerprints and dental charts were circulated nationally and internationally. No matches resulted. The man's shoes were unusually clean and polished, suggesting he had not walked far on the beach. His feet showed a condition where the big and little toes met in a wedge shape, consistent with wearing pointed shoes. On January 14, 1949, a brown suitcase was located at Adelaide Railway Station cloakroom. It had been deposited on November 30th, 1948. Contents included clothing with tags removed, a screwdriver, a table knife with the blade cut down, a stenciling brush, and thread matching an invisible repair on the dead man's trousers. No identification linked the suitcase directly, but police concluded it belonged to the deceased in June 1949. During re-examination, Professor John Cleland discovered a small fob pocket sewn into the waistband of the trousers. Inside was a tightly rolled scrap of paper with the words, "Tamam should," printed on it. The phrase, Persian for "it is ended" or "finished," came from the final page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Police located the specific edition, a Whitcomb and Toombs version. A man who found the book in the back seat of his unlocked car on Jetty Road, Glenelg, around the time of the death, turned it in. The last page had been torn out, matching the scrap dot on the back cover of the book. Faint pencil markings appeared as 5 lines of capital letters with a possible crossed-out line. Gobabbed, Mliawi, Dimpanip, Mliaboayak, Samstgab. The code has never been deciphered despite extensive analysis. A phone number in the book traced to a nurse known as Jestin, who lived near the beach. She denied knowledge of the man but appeared distressed when shown the plaster cast. Jestin had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a former suitor, Alfred Boxall, in 1945. Boxall was located alive with his copy intact. Jestin's real name was Jessica Thompson. She died in 2007 without confirming any connection. Her son's DNA later ruled out paternity with the Somerton man. The inquest in June 1949 could not determine the man's identity, exact cause of death, or whether it was suicide, accident, or homicide. The case file remained open. The body was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery. Exhumations for further testing occurred later. In 2021, the remains were exhumed again for DNA sampling. In July 2022, University of Adelaide professor Derek Abbott and forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick announced the identification of the Somerton man as Carl Charles Webb. Webb was born on November 16, 1905 in Footscray, Melbourne, Victoria. He worked as an electrical engineer and instrument maker. He married Dorothy Robertson in 1941. The couple separated, and Dorothy filed for divorce in 1947, citing desertion. Webb had a history of poetry writing and personal difficulties. He disappeared from records in 1947 to 1948. DNA extracted from hair in the plaster death mask and genealogical matching to distant relatives, confirmed by family reference samples, established the link with high confidence. South Australian police have not issued an official coronial confirmation as of the latest public records. Webb's family included siblings. He had no known children from the marriage. His movements between Melbourne and Adelaide remain undocumented in the final months. No evidence linked him to espionage despite decades of speculation involving Cold War theories, code breaking, or Soviet connections. The identification indicated a more personal context, possibly involving emotional distress, the nurse Jestin, or unknown associates in Adelaide. The code, the removed labels, the poison suspicion, and the Rubaiyat connection remain unexplained by the identification. No definitive proof established the poison used or the exact circumstances of death. No charges or named suspects beyond historical speculation ever emerged. The case file stays with South Australian authorities. The identification closed the unknown identity aspect after 73 years but left the precise events of late November 1948 unresolved. All documented details derive from 1948 to 1949 police reports, autopsy records, coronial inquest transcripts, item analyses, contemporary newspaper accounts, and 2022 genetic genealogy findings released through University of Adelaide channels and official statements. The timeline begins with Carl Webb's birth in 1905, proceeds through his marriage, separation, disappearance from Melbourne records, arrival and activities in Adelaide on November 30th, 1948, including train and bus travel, death overnight, discovery on December 1st, 1948, suitcase location, Tamamshud paper and Rubaiyat recovery, code discovery, decades of investigation, 2021 exhumation, and 2022 identification. Physical evidence included the body with internal congestion consistent with poisoning, the fob pocket scrap, the book with code, the suitcase contents, and hair samples used for DNA. No trial, conviction, or final coronial ruling on manner of death has been issued post-identification. The Somerton Man investigation concluded the identity phase while retaining open questions on the death circumstances. On July 5, 1966, at the Roper's Motel in Pecos, Texas, a maid discovered the body of a young woman floating face down in the swimming pool around 4 p.m. Earlier that day, screams had been heard from the pool area. Motel staff and a bystander pulled the body from the water. The male companion registered with her remained asleep in their room and was awakened after the discovery. The couple had checked in the previous day under the names Mr. and Mrs. Russell Batuin, also spelled Batuin. They provided a vehicle with out-of-state plates. The woman appeared to be in her late teens. She was approximately 5 feet 3 inches tall, weighed around 120 pounds, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. She wore a two-piece swimsuit at the time of death. No immediate identification documents were located with the body or in the motel room. The male companion provided limited information before leaving the area. Pecos Police Department responded and opened an investigation. Autopsy was performed by a pathologist from Odessa due to Reeves County lacking its own medical examiner. The cause of death was determined as drowning. A quarter-sized red abrasion was noted above the left cheekbone, but its timing relative to death could not be conclusively established. No definitive evidence of foul play, such as defensive wounds or drugs, was documented in initial reports. The death was ruled an accidental drowning. No homicide investigation was opened at the time. The body was buried in a local cemetery with a marker identifying her as Jane Doe. The unidentified woman became known as Pecos Jane Doe. Initial efforts to identify her included circulation of physical descriptions, fingerprints if obtained, and clothing details. The motel registration under a false name and the companion's departure complicated tracing. No matches appeared in missing persons reports from Texas or neighboring states in 1966. The case file accumulated standard documentation but saw limited follow-up activity over decades due to the accidental ruling and lack of leads. Jolene Marie Hemme was born on August 11, 1948, in Salina, Kansas. She was one of 14 siblings. In 1966, at age 17, she left the area with an unidentified male. Family members reported her missing after no further contact. Efforts to locate her in the years following produced no results linking her to Texas. In 2014, an email from an individual in the Netherlands prompted renewed interest by inquiring about the case on missing persons websites. Pecos Police Chief Lisa Tarango reviewed the file upon taking office. Original police records had gone missing, but other documentation and newspaper clippings remained. A new facial reconstruction was commissioned with assistance from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This image generated additional tips and public attention. In 2019, the remains were exhumed for forensic examination. Skeletal analysis confirmed a white female aged 15 to 18 years. A bone sample was sent for DNA extraction. In 2020, Othram Laboratory in Texas performed forensic-grade genome sequencing on the sample. The resulting DNA profile was used for genetic genealogy analysis through innovative forensic. Family trees were constructed and leads developed pointing to relatives in Kansas. A reference sample from one of Jolene Hemme's living siblings confirmed the match. On January 19, 2021, Pecos Police Department held a press conference announcing the identification of Pecos Jane Doe as Jolene Marie Hemme. The process involved collaboration among Pecos PD, NCMEC, Othram Incorporated, Innovative Forensic, and Gene by Gene, with crowdfunding support for laboratory costs. The identification occurred 55 years after the death. Following confirmation, Hemme's family in Kansas was notified. Arrangements were made to transfer remains or update burial records. The family expressed gratitude for the efforts of Pecos residents and law enforcement who had maintained the grave and treated the case with ongoing attention. A new headstone was planned. The investigation into the circumstances of her death was reopened as a suspicious case. The male companion registered as Russell Batuin was never identified or located. Police appealed for information on his identity, the vehicle used, or any individuals who may have known Hemme or the man in 1966. No definitive evidence established homicide, but the false registration, age difference potential, and circumstances surrounding the pool incident left questions unresolved. No charges have been filed. The file remains open for any future developments regarding the companion or additional witnesses. Investigation procedures in 1966 relied on manual checks, local canvassing, and limited national bulletins. The absence of immediate foul play indicators and the drowning determination reduced priority. Modern resolution used exhumation, advanced DNA sequencing from skeletal remains, and genealogical database matching unavailable in the 1960s. The case demonstrated cross-jurisdictional gaps in missing persons reporting for runaways or transient individuals in the mid-1960s. All documented facts derive from Pecos Police Department announcements, Othram and innovative forensic reports, autopsy summaries, family statements through official channels, contemporary newspaper records, and Texas monthly investigative coverage. The timeline begins with Jolene Hemy's birth on August 11, 1948, in Kansas, includes her departure from home in 1966, motel check-in on or around July 4, 1966, under the alias, death by drowning on July 5, 1966, burial as Jane Doe, periodic reviews, 2014 email prompt, 2019 exhumation, 2020 to 2021 DNA and genealogy work, and public identification on January 19, 2021. Physical evidence included the body with drowning indicators and facial abrasion, motel registration details, and retained biological samples. No named suspect or conclusive determination of accident versus foul play exists in public records. The death of Jolene Hemy at age 17 in the Roper's Motel pool stays under review by Pecos authorities. On January 27, 1993, two girls walking in Wayne Fitzgerald State Park near Ina, Illinois, discovered a human head in the brush along an interior road in a primitive campground area. The head was severely decomposed with attached cervical vertebrae. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office responded. Initial examination indicated the remains belonged to a white female estimated between 30 and 50 years old. The rest of the body was never recovered. Investigators concluded the head had likely been thrown from a moving vehicle along the park road. Forensic analysis determined the decedent had wry neck syndrome, also known as torticollis, causing a noticeable tilt of the head. Dental records showed specific dental work. The manner of death was ruled homicide, although the exact cause could not be determined due to the limited remains. The case was designated Ina Jane Doe after the discovery location. Police created forensic sketches and a clay bust. The file accumulated over 500 pages of tips, interviews, and leads. No identification resulted from fingerprints, dental comparisons, or missing persons checks at the time. The head was retained as evidence. Susan Hope Lund was born November 29, 1967, in Tennessee. She was 25 years old at the time of her death. She was a mother of 3 children. Lund lived in the Clarksville, Tennessee area. Family reported her missing around December 24, 1992. She had not returned home after that date. No verified sightings placed her movements between late December 1992 and late January 1993. The distance between Clarksville, Tennessee, and Ina, Illinois, is approximately 300 miles. The unidentified head remained in storage. Periodic reviews of the case occurred but produced no matches. In later years, the case appeared on unidentified persons databases and true crime websites. In 2021, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office collaborated with Redgrave Research Forensic Services, forensic anthropologists including those from the University of New Hampshire, and other experts. The team reanalyzed skeletal features, corrected inaccuracies in prior forensic art including hairstyle and overpathologized traits, and pursued advanced DNA testing. Samples from the remains were processed at Astrea Forensics for DNA profile generation suitable for forensic genetic genealogy. The profile was uploaded to GEDmatch in February 2022. Genealogical analysis produced family tree leads. A close relative match, approximately 432 cm consistent with a first cousin once removed relationship, was identified. Archival research and further investigation followed. A sibling provided a confirmatory reference sample. On March 6, 2022, Direct DNA comparison confirmed the match on March 11, 2022. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office held a press conference announcing the identification of Ina Jane Doe as Susan Hope Lund. The process resolved 29 years of unknown identity. Lund's family received notification. The homicide investigation was officially reopened. Authorities appealed for information on Lund's activities after December 24, 1992. Her associates, travel routes towards southern Illinois, or anyone who may have seen her in the Clarksville area or along interstate corridors in late December 1992 to January 1993. The decapitation indicated use of a sharp instrument or tool capable of severing the head. No tool or additional remains surfaced despite searches in the park and surrounding areas. The disposal method suggested intent to conceal identity and hinder recovery of the full body. No foreign DNA or other trace evidence from the head produced a suspect profile in public updates. No arrests have been made. No named perpetrators or motives have been publicly established. The case file remains active with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Susan Lund had 3 children at the time of her disappearance. Limited public details exist on her personal circumstances in 1992 beyond her status as a mother in the Clarksville region. The timeline places her last confirmed presence in Tennessee on or around December 24, 1992. The head was discovered 34 days later on January 27, 1993. Postmortem interval estimates aligned with death occurring in mid to late January 1993. The distance and timing indicate she was transported after death or killed after travel from Tennessee. Investigation procedures in 1993 included standard scene processing in the state park, autopsy limited to the head, dental charting, skeletal analysis for biological profile, and manual missing persons crosschecks. The limited remaining forensic options available at the time. Advances in DNA extraction from degraded tissue, forensic genetic genealogy, and interdisciplinary reanalysis of skeletal features and artistic reconstructions resolved the identification. Updated forensic art corrected earlier inaccuracies and supported the genealogical process. All documented facts derive from Jefferson County Sheriff's Office announcements, Redgrave research reports, forensic anthropology publications, family statements channeled through law enforcement, and contemporaneous records. The sequence covers Susan Lund's birth on November 29, 1967, her life as a mother in Tennessee, disappearance around December 24, 1992, murder and decapitation in January 1993, discovery of the head on January 27, 1993, 29 years as Ina Jane Doe, and identification confirmed March 6, 2022, with public announcement March 11, 2022. Physical evidence consisted solely of the head and attached vertebrae. No full body, clothing, personal items, or direct links to a suspect vehicle or perpetrator have been recovered. The homicide of Susan Lund remains unsolved with no statute of limitations. Authorities continue to seek information on her final movements and contacts. On July 31, 1988, a young boy digging in the backyard of his family home at 130 Bay Knoll Drive in Irondequoit, New York, uncovered skeletal remains buried approximately 2 to 3 feet deep in a shallow grave on a small knoll. Irondequoit Police Department responded to the scene. The remains were those of a white female buried in a hunched, head-first position. No clothing or personal items were recovered with the body that allowed immediate identification. The neighborhood had been developed for about 24 years prior to the discovery. The area was previously a rhubarb farm before residential construction. Forensic examination determined the decedent was between 15 and 19 years old at the time of death, approximately 5 feet 1 inch tall, with a slight overlap of the front teeth. She had extensive dental work including gold foil restorations on teeth numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10. For white buttons were found near the remains. No signs of obvious trauma appeared on the recovered bones. The cause of death could not be determined from the skeletal remains. Investigators ruled the death a homicide based on the burial circumstances and disposal in a shallow grave. The postmortem interval was estimated between 10 and 30 years, placing death as early as the late 1950s and as late as the late 1970s. The case was designated Irondequoit Jane Doe. Police circulated dental charts, biological profile details, and reconstructions. Multiple facial reconstructions were produced, including a 1988 clay bust and updated versions released by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2019. The case appeared in NAMAS as UP 2607 and on the DOE network as 122 UFNY. Over 30 potential matches from missing persons reports were investigated and excluded through comparison of records, dental information, and other details. The Irondequoit Police Department maintained the active investigation. The remains were held as evidence. In subsequent decades, the file received periodic reviews. In 2019, new facial reconstructions and public appeals generated additional tips. The DNA DOE project accepted the case for forensic genetic genealogy testing in partnership with the Irondequoit Police Department and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. DNA extraction and sequencing were performed on retained skeletal samples. The profile was prepared for database comparison. As of the latest public updates in 2025 to 2026, the genetic genealogy process remains active with no public identification announced. The burial location behind a residential property in an established neighborhood indicated the perpetrator selected or knew the site at a time when the area was less developed or during early construction phases. The shallow grave and body position suggested hurried disposal with intent to conceal the remains. The absence of the full set of clothing or personal effects at the scene limited identification avenues in the pre-DNA era. Gold foil dental restorations pointed to dental care received in the 1950s or 1960s, consistent with the estimated time of death range. No fingerprints or other biometric data were available due to the skeletal condition. Irondequoit police continued to appeal for information regarding any young woman who went missing in the Rochester, New York region or surrounding states between the late 1950s and late 1970s who matched the biological profile, dental work, or height. No named suspects have been publicly identified. No additional forensic links, such as trace evidence or witness statements from the construction period of the Bay Knoll area, have resolved the case. The homicide file remains open with no statute of limitations. All documented details derive from Irondequoit Police Department records. NAMAS Case UP 2607, DOE Network File 122 UFNY, DNA DOE Project Summaries, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children Reconstructions, Forensic Anthropology Reports, and contemporaneous news coverage based on law enforcement briefings. The sequence begins with the estimated death window between the late 1950s and late 1970s, proceeds through burial in the pre- or early residential development period of the Bay Knoll Drive area, continues with the discovery on July 31, 1988, by the child digging in the backyard, multiple reconstructions and exclusions over decades, renewed forensic efforts including 2019 imaging, and ongoing DNA DOE project genetic genealogy analysis. Physical evidence consisted of the nearly complete skeleton for white buttons and dental structures. No clothing, jewelry, or other personal artifacts contributed to identification. The Irondequoit Jane Doe case stands as an active homicide investigation focused on establishing identity through advanced genetic methods where traditional records failed. On October 5, 1980, at approximately 9 p.m., a passing motorist discovered the body of a young female just south of Route 146, west of Arroyo Grande Boulevard in Henderson, Nevada, near Las Vegas. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition in a desert area. Henderson Police Department responded. The decedent was a white female, approximately 15 to 20 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, with light brown or blonde hair approximately 10 to 12 inches long. She had a fair complexion and weighed around 110 to 120 pounds. No clothing or personal effects that immediately identified her were recovered at the scene. Autopsy by the Clark County Coroner's Office determined the cause of death as homicide. The manner involved strangulation or other violent means consistent with the condition of the remains. The body showed signs of having been in the desert environment for several days to weeks. No immediate fingerprints or dental matches produced an identification. The case was classified as an unidentified homicide victim and became known locally in some references as part of Las Vegas area Jane Doe cases. Though not formally titled Babes in the Woods in official records, the remains were held for further analysis. The investigation included circulation of physical descriptions, dental charts, and biological profile details through national missing person systems. Multiple potential matches from missing teenagers in the Southwest were checked and excluded. The remote desert dump site suggested the perpetrator transported the victim by vehicle and selected an isolated location to conceal the body. No witnesses reported seeing the disposal or related activity. The case file accumulated standard homicide documentation but remained unsolved for identification and perpetrator for over 4 decades. Tammy Terrell was born in 1963. She was 17 years old at the time of her death. She was last seen on September 28, 1980, at a restaurant in Roswell, New Mexico, in the company of an unidentified white male adult. No further verified sightings occurred after that date. Family and associates in New Mexico reported her missing after the encounter. The distance between Roswell and the Henderson Discovery Site is consistent with travel along interstate routes toward Las Vegas in 2021. The City of Henderson Police Department's investigative division submitted retained samples for advanced forensic testing. Othram Laboratory or partner facilities performed forensic genetic genealogy sequencing. The DNA profile was analyzed through genealogical databases. Family tree reconstruction produced leads connecting to relatives. Confirmatory reference samples from Terrell family members established the positive identification. On November 10, 2021, Henderson police announced that the victim known as Jane Arroyo Grande Doe was Tammy Terrell. The identification resolved 41 years of unknown status. Henderson police notified Terrell's family. The homicide investigation was renewed with focus on her activities in late September 1980, the unidentified male seen with her in Roswell, and any connections or travel to the Las Vegas area. No arrests have been made. No named suspect has been publicly charged. Appeals continue for information on the male companion or witnesses who saw Terrell after September 28, 1980. The murder occurred between late September and early October 1980. The body was disposed in a desert location accessible by vehicle but remote enough to delay discovery. Decomposition limited some trace evidence recovery under 1980 technology. No foreign DNA profiles leading to a suspect were detailed in public updates. The case demonstrates gaps in cross-state missing persons coordination for transient or runaway teenagers in the pre-digital era. All documented facts derive from Henderson Police Department announcements, Clark County coroner records, Othram or partner laboratory reports, family statements through official channels, and contemporaneous documentation. The timeline covers Tammy Terrell's birth in 1963, last sighting on September 28, 1980, in Roswell, New Mexico, with an unidentified male, death and disposal in the Henderson Desert, discovery on October 5, 1980, decades as an unidentified homicide victim, and DNA confirmation on November 10, 2021. Physical evidence included the decomposed body with homicide indicators and any retained biological material used for genetic genealogy. The homicide of Tammy Terrell remains unsolved with active investigation into the circumstances and perpetrator. No additional linked victims have been publicly confirmed in this specific case. Roberts, born in 1960 in Cardiff, Wales, moved from her home in the Grangetown area to Antwerp, Belgium, in February 1992. She was 31 years old. Her family last received contact from her in the form of a postcard sent in May 1992. On June 3, 1992, her body was recovered from the Groot Shin River in the Deurne district of Antwerp, pushed against a grate near the 10 Ecovelii, close to a sports and concert venue. The body had been in the water for some time. Autopsy findings confirmed she had been violently killed, with at least one stab wound documented. Belgian authorities listed her as an unidentified murder victim. Physical description at the time of discovery: approximately 1.70 meters tall, stout build, light-skinned, mid-length dark hair, teeth in good condition. She wore a dark blue, purple, and light green t-shirt with the inscription Splinter and 1990, dark blue Adidas training trousers with 3 green stripes, and dark brown walking shoes, size 40, brand DAG. The most distinctive identifying feature was a tattoo on her left forearm, a black flower with green leaves and the inscription Nick written underneath. Police photographed and documented the tattoo as the primary marker for potential identification. Initial investigations in 1992 exhausted local leads. Authorities suspected she was not Belgian and may have come from abroad. No immediate matches appeared in missing persons databases. The case remained open but inactive for decades due to lack of identity. In May 2023, Belgian, Dutch, and German police, in coordination with Interpol, launched Operation Identify Me. The operation publicly released details of 22 unidentified murdered women found in those countries, including photographs of clothing, tattoos, and facial reconstructions where available. This marked the first public use of Interpol's black notices for such cases. The appeal generated over 1,000 tips within months. A family member in the United Kingdom saw media coverage of the woman with the flower tattoo case, including images of the tattoo in a BBC report. The relative contacted authorities. The family traveled to Belgium and formally identified Rita Roberts in 2023. Belgian prosecutors announced the identification in November 2023. The tattoo matched exactly, and the timeline aligned with her move to Antwerp and the final postcard. Rita Roberts had lived in Cardiff near the docks, a working-class area at the time. Family statements described her as a passionate, loving, free-spirited person who adored traveling, loved her family, especially nephews and nieces, and wanted a family of her own. She was known as someone who lit up rooms and stood up for herself and others. She had reportedly spent time in the Netherlands before or around her move to Belgium. Post-identification. The Antwerp Public Prosecutor's Office and Belgian Federal Police confirmed the murder investigation remains active. They issued public appeals for any information on Roberts' activities in Antwerp between February and June 1992. Her associates, movements, or anyone who may have seen her in the period leading to her death. No perpetrator has been identified or charged. No specific suspect details, motives, or additional forensic links have been publicly released beyond the cause of death involving violence and stabbing, with the body disposed of in the river. The case demonstrated limitations of pre-DNA and pre-digital missing persons coordination across borders in the early 1990s. Standard procedures at the time included local autopsies, fingerprinting if possible, clothing analysis, and limited international checks. The 2023 identification relied on public dissemination of visual identifiers rather than initial biometric data. Operation Identify Me continued processing tips for the remaining cases after Roberts' naming. Roberts' family expressed that the identification, while shocking and heartbreaking, provided closure on her fate after 31 years. They noted gratitude for the efforts that uncovered what happened to her. Belgian authorities continue to seek witnesses or records of her life in Antwerp, including possible employment, housing, or social connections in the city or nearby Netherlands. The murder file stays open with no statute of limitations on homicide in Belgium. No additional victims or linked serial patterns have been publicly connected to this specific killing. Forensic preservation of evidence from 1992 allowed potential future testing if new leads emerge. The river disposal and time in water degraded some biological traces available under 1990s technology. Modern cold case reviews may include re-examination of any retained samples. The identification process validated the use of distinctive tattoos and clothing as identifiers when fingerprints and dental records yield no hits in domestic systems. Rita Roberts was buried or memorialized following family involvement after the 2023 confirmation. The investigation into the individual or individuals responsible for her stabbing and disposal continues as of the latest public updates. This sequence compiles verified details from Interpol records, Belgian police statements, family comments released through official channels, and contemporaneous news reporting based on law enforcement briefings. The total timeline covers her relocation in February 1992, last contact in May, discovery on June 3, 1992, and identification on November 14, 2023. No killer profile, arrest, or trial exists in the public record. The script prioritizes documented actions, dates, physical evidence, and procedural outcomes without added interpretation. On April 21, 2026, the state of Oregon formally closed a homicide investigation that spanned 43 consecutive years, concluding with the sentencing of 73-year-old Marcus Sanfratello in Josephine County Circuit Court. Sanfratello entered a formal plea of guilty to manslaughter in the first degree for the July 1983 killing of 27-year-old Teresa Peroni. The legally binding plea agreement resulted in a 20-year prison sentence with a statutory mandatory minimum of 10 years to be served before any possibility of administrative review or release. The resolution of this specific case relied exclusively on the intersection of long-term evidence preservation protocols, targeted advancements in forensic anthropology, and cross-jurisdictional law enforcement coordination between state and municipal agencies in Oregon and California. The conviction finalizes an investigative timeline that initiated with a standard missing persons report, stalled due to an absolute lack of physical remains, briefly reactivated upon the geographic discovery of partial skeletal elements in 1997, and finally concluded when modern nuclear and mitochondrial DNA profiling provided definitive, mathematically absolute identification of the victim. The successful prosecution of Marcus Sanfratello required the methodical reconstruction of events from 1983, integrating decades-old witness testimony with 21st-century genomic science to satisfy the legal burden of proof required for a homicide conviction. Teresa Peroni was 27 years old during the summer of 1983. Prior to her disappearance, her biographical data indicates she had experienced significant personal and logistical transitions, specifically including a recent legal divorce. In a documented effort to stabilize her personal life following the dissolution of her marriage, Peroni had actively joined a local church congregation. This specific lifestyle modification became a verified and documented source of severe friction between Peroni and her then-boyfriend Marcus Sanfratello, who was 29 years old at the time of the events in question. Formal witness statements collected by investigators, including sworn accounts from Peroni's biological brother, Russell Neal, and their mutual aunt, indicated that Sanfratello exhibited intense, uncontrollable hostility regarding her religious involvement. The aunt provided a specific report to authorities detailing an incident where she directly observed Sanfratello becoming overtly and physically furious with Peroni exclusively over her church attendance. This verified behavioral history established a critical baseline of conflict, territorial control, and psychological volatility within their domestic relationship leading directly up to the events of July 1983. The documented escalation of this domestic tension provided early investigators with an established motive for subsequent violence on or around the Independence Day holiday. Specifically documented as July 4, 1983, Peroni and Sanfratello traveled together to attend a social gathering in a highly rural area near the unincorporated community of Selma, Oregon. The specific geographic location of this gathering was recorded in police files as 1270 Illinois River Road. Selma is situated within Josephine County, an area topographically characterized by dense, unmanaged timberland, extremely rugged mountainous terrain, steep ravines, and a thick understory of Pacific Northwest vegetation. During the course of the gathering, a severe verbal altercation occurred between Peroni and Sanfratello. Investigative records uploaded to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System definitively state that the argument centered on Sanfratello's specific allegations that Peroni was actively involved with another romantic partner. Following this dispute, multiple attendees at the gathering visually observed Peroni and Sanfratello leaving the immediate vicinity of the residential property and walking together away from the road, disappearing directly into the adjacent dense wooded area. Peroni was never seen alive by any witness again. When she failed to return from the timberline that evening, and subsequently failed to make any form of contact with family members, employers, or associates in the following days, her family initiated formal protocols by filing a missing persons report with local law enforcement agencies. The Josephine County Sheriff's Office assumed primary jurisdiction and initiated the original investigation in July 1983. Patrol deputies and volunteer search and rescue personnel systematically canvassed the immediate geographical radius surrounding the 1270 Illinois River Road address. However, the challenging topography of the Oregon wilderness severely limited the efficacy and scope of the physical search grid. Without a defined primary crime scene, a recovered weapon, biological fluids, or a victim's body, investigators were strictly restricted to circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Law enforcement personnel systematically interviewed attendees of the holiday gathering, independently corroborating the timeline of the jealousy-induced argument and confirming the couple's simultaneous departure into the tree line. Sanfratello was formally questioned by detectives during this initial investigative phase. The sheriff's office officially classified Peroni's disappearance as highly suspicious in nature, documenting Sanfratello in the case file as the absolute last known individual to see her alive. Despite these findings, the Josephine County District Attorney's Office reviewed the collected sworn statements and determined that the evidentiary threshold required for criminal homicide charges had not been met. The investigation exhausted all available immediate leads and transitioned to a dormant, cold case status. During the extensive period the Peroni investigation remained functionally inactive, Marcus Sanfratello's criminal record expanded significantly across state lines, establishing a heavily documented, legally verified pattern of severe, life-threatening violence directed specifically against domestic partners. In 1985, exactly 2 years after Peroni vanished in the Oregon woods, Sanfratello was apprehended and arrested by law enforcement in Yreka, California. The Siskiyou County District Attorney charged him with multiple severe felony offenses, specifically including 2 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of rape, and 1 count of residential burglary. These charges stemmed directly from an unprovoked, highly violent physical attack in which Sanfratello utilized an edged weapon to repeatedly stab his ex-wife and her 14-year-old biological daughter. He was subsequently prosecuted, convicted of attempted murder, and remanded to the custody of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. The presiding judge issued a sentence mandating more than 15 years of incarceration within the California state prison system. Following his eventual parole and release from state custody, his criminal activity persisted, resulting in a federal conviction in 1999 for the theft or embezzlement of United States government property. This federal conviction resulted in a 2-year probationary sentence and a judicial mandate to pay exactly $4,000 in financial restitution. This legally established, incontrovertible history of extreme violence and attempted lethality directed at female partners would later serve as critical, admissible contextual evidence for Oregon investigators reevaluating the dormant 1983 Selma incident. The physical circumstances of the Peroni missing persons case remained entirely static for 14 years until a geographic anomaly prompted a localized law enforcement response in 1997. Private citizens traversing unmanaged private property in the direct vicinity of the original 1983 search radius near Illinois River Road discovered a single, isolated human skull exposed directly to the environmental elements. The Josephine County Sheriff's Office immediately responded, secured the perimeter to prevent biological contamination, and initiated a secondary, highly concentrated grid sweep of the surrounding acreage. To maximize the probability of locating additional skeletal remains, clothing fibers, or evidentiary artifacts, law enforcement deployed specialized human remains detection canines, commonly referred to as cadaver dogs. These canines are specifically trained in the olfactory detection of volatile organic compounds released during the human decomposition process. The decomposition of human tissue releases hundreds of specific chemical markers, including putrescine and cadaverine, which permeate the surrounding soil matrix. However, after 14 years of heavy seasonal precipitation, soil turnover, and biological scavenging in the Oregon climate, these chemical signatures are completely eradicated from the surface level, rendering olfactory detection impossible. The dogs could only clear the immediate surface area, leaving the forensic burden entirely on the single recovered osteological artifact. Despite the rigorous application of this specialized search protocol, no postcranial remains, no textiles, and no personal effects were recovered anywhere within the search zone. The physically isolated nature of the singular cranial bone strongly suggested extensive postmortem scavenging by local wildlife populations, such as coyotes, cougars, or feral omnivores, which is a common taphonomic occurrence in the rural Pacific Northwest that routinely scatters human remains over vast, untrackable distances. The recovered skull was formally logged into the evidence chain of custody and transferred to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification for Forensic Anthropological Analysis and Potential Genetic Profiling, in 1997. The specific scientific techniques required for DNA extraction from environmentally degraded osteological material were still in their developmental infancy. While state forensic anthropologists could accurately determine the biological sex, approximate age range at the time of death, and estimated postmortem interval from the morphological characteristics of the cranium, extracting a viable, complete genetic profile from a bone exposed to Oregon woodland conditions for 14 consecutive years exceeded the technical capabilities of standard contemporary laboratories. The dense mineral matrix of human bone shields cellular DNA to a specific degree, but prolonged exposure to ultraviolet radiation, moisture fluctuations, extreme soil acidity, and aggressive microbial activity inevitably degrades the cellular material, chemically severing the DNA strands into microscopic, unreadable fragments. Because no definitive, pre-existing comparative DNA profile existed for Teresa Peroni in any state or federal database, and the fragmented genetic markers extracted from the skull were statistically insufficient for a conclusive match using the polymerase chain reaction technology available in the late 1990s, the remains could only be presumptively linked to the Peroni case based purely on geographic proximity to her last known location. The scientific investigation once again reached an absolute evidentiary impasse, and the case file was returned to a dormant classification in the archives. The final, conclusive, and successful phase of the homicide investigation commenced 27 years later, in 2024. The Josephine County Sheriff's Office systematically reopened the 1983 file, assigning Detective Sergeant Kyle Heinrich to command a modernized, aggressive inquiry. The strategic operational plan required a complex multi-agency infrastructure to overcome the historical deficits of the case. The Sheriff's Office formally partnered with the Oregon Department of Justice, the Josephine County District Attorney's Office, and Oregon State Police forensic anthropologist Dr. Nissi Vance. The operational objective dictated by this task force was twofold: secure a definitive, scientifically unassailable genetic identification of the 1997 skull, and reconstruct the circumstantial timeline of the 1983 disappearance to a legal standard capable of securing a grand jury indictment for murder. Investigators explicitly utilized the intervening decades of exponential technological advancement in the field of forensic genomics. By 2024, specialized laboratory protocols had evolved to routinely utilize next-generation sequencing and highly sensitive single nucleotide polymorphism analysis, allowing genetic scientists to physically piece together heavily fragmented, environmentally destroyed DNA sequences from highly compromised bone samples that were previously considered entirely untestable. To facilitate the necessary comparative genetic analysis, law enforcement investigators systematically located surviving members of Teresa Peroni's biological family. Detectives collected fresh buccal swabs from these relatives to serve as pristine, uncontaminated reference samples. Simultaneously, the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification subjected the 1997 cranial remains to their most advanced modern extraction protocols. The process at the facility involved physically pulverizing a section of the cortical bone into a fine powder. This powder was then subjected to a highly caustic chemical demineralization process using ethylene tetracic acid to dissolve the calcium matrix and release the trapped osteocytes. The cellular material was then processed using specialized enzymes to break down the cellular proteins and isolate the surviving DNA molecules. The resulting genetic material, though heavily fractured, was amplified using polymerase chain reaction techniques tailored specifically for short tandem repeats, allowing the laboratory to build a composite genetic profile that was statistically unique to the individual. The laboratory technicians then computationally compared the reconstructed sequence extracted from the skull against the newly acquired familial reference samples. The resulting statistical probability of the genetic match mathematically eliminated all scientific doubt, formally and legally confirming to a degree of absolute certainty that the human skull discovered in the Selma Woods in 1997 belonged exclusively to Teresa Peroni. This absolute identification immediately converted the official classification of the incident from a missing persons case to a confirmed criminal homicide investigation, providing the foundational legal requirement to proceed with active criminal prosecution against the primary suspect. Simultaneously with the genetic testing, detectives executed a comprehensive, ground-up re-interview protocol. They utilized public records and specialized databases to track down the aging individuals who had originally attended the July 4, 1983 gathering on Illinois River Road. Law enforcement capitalized on the psychological reality that human memories of a specific, highly volatile violent argument immediately preceding a permanent disappearance often remain salient and accessible even decades later. The renewed witness interviews strictly corroborated the original 1983 police reports, legally solidifying the exact timeline of the dispute regarding suspected infidelity, documenting the specific hostile and aggressive demeanor of Marcus Sanfratello, and tracing the exact physical trajectory of the couple walking away from the residential property and directly into the timber. The combination of the definitive forensic identification of the victims remains found in the direct geographic proximity of her last known location, combined with corroborated eyewitness accounts of the suspect's isolated, exclusive access to the victim immediately prior to her death, and his subsequent, legally documented history of lethal violence against intimate female partners, provided the state prosecution with a cohesive, impenetrable circumstantial and forensic framework. The specific legal strategy for prosecution was engineered by the Oregon Department of Justice Criminal Division, led by Senior Assistant Attorneys General Brad Calebaugh and John Casalino, working directly alongside Special Agent Brendan McGuire. On June 27, 2025, the prosecuting attorneys presented the comprehensive, multi-decade evidentiary file to a Josephine County grand jury. The legal presentation detailed the absolute forensic DNA match from the University of North Texas, the anthropological evidence provided by Dr. Nissi Vance, the exact geographic data mapping the 1983 party location to the 1997 skull recovery site, and the sworn, corroborated witness testimonies regarding Sanfratello's behavior and the timeline of disappearance. After reviewing the presented evidence, the grand jury returned a true bill, formally indicting Marcus Sanfratello on the severe felony charge of murder in the second degree under the statutory parameters of Oregon state law. Immediately following the sealed indictment, a coordinated, interstate apprehension operation was initiated by the task force. Investigators had actively monitored Sanfratello's residential status and daily movements. He was physically located living as a free citizen in Chico, California, a municipality situated within Butte County, approximately 250 miles south of the Oregon state border. On June 28, 2025, exactly one day after the grand jury indictment was handed down, sworn officers from the Chico Police Department, acting upon the extraditable Oregon felony warrant and coordinating in real time with the Josephine County Sheriff's Office, successfully executed the arrest. Sanfratello, then 72 years old, was taken into police custody without physical incident or resistance. He was immediately transported and detained at the Butte County Jail facility, where he underwent standard biometric booking procedures, including fingerprinting and photographic recording, while being held in a secure cell awaiting interstate extradition. The extradition process required strict administrative authorization under the Uniform Criminal Extradition Act to legally transfer physical jurisdiction of the inmate from California authorities back to the state of Oregon. Sanfratello waived his right to contest the extradition and was subsequently transported across state lines in secure law enforcement vehicles and formally booked into the Josephine County Correctional Facility. This was immediately followed by his formal arraignment in Josephine County Circuit Court, where the charging documents for second-degree murder were officially read and entered into the permanent public judicial record. The complex judicial process culminated in the spring of 2026. The defense counsel actively representing Sanfratello, attorney Elizabeth Baker, engaged in sustained plea negotiations with the state prosecutors. The defense strategically cited Sanfratello's advanced chronological age of 73 and a documented, clinically verified diagnosis of a highly complex health issue as the primary motivating factors for the defendant seeking to avoid a protracted, physically demanding criminal trial. The state of Oregon, objectively evaluating the logistical complexities, financial costs, and inherent risks of trying a 43-year-old homicide case where the primary physical evidence was severely limited to a single, degraded cranial bone and aging witness memories, accepted the terms of a negotiated settlement. Marcus Sanfratello formally agreed to waive his constitutional right to a trial by jury and enter a legally binding plea of guilty to a lesser-included offense. On Tuesday, April 21, 2026, the final sentencing hearing convened in the courtroom. The original grand jury charge of murder in the second degree was officially amended per the stipulations of the plea agreement. Sanfratello stood before the court and pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the first degree. Under Oregon revised statutes, this specific class A felony denotes a criminal homicide committed recklessly under circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to the value of human life, or a homicide committed intentionally but under the influence of an extreme emotional disturbance. The presiding circuit court judge reviewed and ratified the agreement, officially sentencing Sanfratello to a mandatory period of 20 years in the physical custody of the Oregon Department of Corrections. Under the specific sentencing guidelines enacted by Oregon legislation, crimes such as manslaughter in the first degree carry mandatory minimum sentences that cannot be reduced by early release for good behavior, administrative parole, or judicial discretion. Therefore, the 10-year baseline established in Sanfratello's plea agreement represents a hard, immutable chronological requirement. His transfer to the Oregon Department of Corrections intake facility marks the beginning of this mandatory term, where he will be classified based on his security risk and medical requirements before permanent placement in a state facility. Given his current advanced age and his stated declining medical status, the 10-year mandatory minimum essentially represents a statistically probable life sentence. The court noted that he will receive necessary, standard-issue medical treatment for his diagnosed health conditions while incarcerated within the heavily regulated environment of the state penitentiary system. Attorney General Dan Rayfield delivered the official public statement on behalf of the state following the final adjudication, explicitly emphasizing that the massive 43-year chronological interval between the commission of the homicide and the resulting judicial conviction did not negate the absolute mandate for legal accountability. The ultimate conclusion of the Teresa Peroni investigation provides a sterile, highly factual, but definitive metric of modern law enforcement capabilities and forensic evolution. The operational timeline demonstrates a precise, unyielding procedural trajectory. A 1983 suspected homicide completely stalled by the absolute absence of biological evidence. A 1997 physical recovery stalled by the technological limitations of early genetic science. And a 2024 resolution forced into existence by the rigorous application of advanced osteological DNA sequencing. The final conviction and incarceration of Marcus Sanfratello strictly required the systematic aggregation of decades-old witness statements, the highly complex chemical extraction of degraded nucleotides from weather-exposed skeletal matrix, and the seamless bureaucratic integration of local, state, and interstate law enforcement agencies. The permanent legal record of the state of Oregon now definitively reflects that on July 4, 1983, Marcus Sanfratello violently terminated the life of Teresa Peroni in the remote woods of Selma, and 43 years later, the combined forces of the forensic sciences and the judicial system effectively quantified, proved, and penalized that singular action.